Hey, Composing Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and today we will be talking about how to use the playlist effectively because knowing how to work this thing is so useful. Now, I'm going to show you a couple techniques that I use to work this thing. Now, the first thing right off the bat is I hardly ever come up here to this top menu to click on these things. I used to do it a lot, so occasionally I will just out of habit, but I very rarely do. Instead, what I click is I middle mouse click, left click. It brings up this cool fancy dancy menu. I tell you that in previous videos in this series. So now let's break into the next thing. We see here that we have automation, piano, this piano note, and this waveform. Today, we're just going to be mostly looking at how to manipulate loops quickly. So, and that's, we're going to kind of just do that. So let's pull open a loop. So I have here a drum break thing, and it sounds nice, right? Now, one of the things that's really handy about this is I will often chop and time stretch stuff all sorts of weird ways using the playlist. So in order to chop it, I can come up here and click this guy, but that's kind of slow. So instead what I'll do is I'll middle mouse click and select it from here and then go back to the pencil tool like that. Alternatively, I could get to here and then hit P to get back to the pencil tool, but even that still isn't quite as fast. So what I'll do is I deliberately leave an empty lane. I've started to do this a lot more now because if I do that, I can click the Shift key on the right side of my keyboard. If I do that, and then I click, it brings up the cut tool automatically. This is outrageously useful. So I shift click and then do that, and then bang, I can chop this thing up however I desire. If I had stuff right there, let's say that I had, more of these. If I shift and click, it no longer does it. It just selects, actually just duplicates the clip. So I want space there so I can do this. If I did have a clip there, there's still a way for me to chop it, and that would be coming down here and selecting the cut tool like so. There's a shortcut for it, but I rarely use it. It is C. So you could hit C and then you could hit P to get back to the pencil tool. But I prefer to maneuver through these menus usually. Okay, so that's the first one. Now let's say, okay, so we chop it up a couple times. Let's say we wanted to delete that guy. We didn't just want to chop him. We want to delete this. Well, there's a tool. If you right click instead of left click, you will get this red one. This will delete the smaller side of your file. So I can just delete that. Now it's gone. I don't have to worry about it. Now let's say, so we'll chop up our file. And then let's say that we isolate this hit right here. And we want to time stretch it to be twice as big. Well, you click this little menu here. And the reason I'm doing this is because if I time stretch it as it is now, so I click this little stretch icon or I hit Shift M and it will toggle that on and off. So I click it, and if I time stretch it, it time stretches all of them. So I don't want that to happen. So what I want to happen is I will click, and then you see they have these little dots. While this menu's open, if I hit the letter that has these dots under it, it will automatically select that thing for me. So there are two that I should be aware of. There's Make Unique, and then Make Unique as Sample. I prefer Make Unique because Make Unique as Sample will literally chop the sample, and you will literally have a whole separate sample that is just this. There won't be any of the extra stuff. It'll literally only be that long. It's very handy when you want to do that, but I want the rest of my file to be there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and I'm going to hit M for Make Unique. And there it is. It's made unique. And you see there's a number 2 here indicating it. And I have a new file here. And what I can do now is I can hit Shift M to enter stretch mode. And I can pull it out. And it is now stretched. So I have this. So that's kind of cool. Now, you may be doing this with like vocal chops or whatever it is you're doing. Maybe you have some piece of audio. It's a very common thing I want to do. Now, let's say that, now I want to reorganize this in a variety of ways. Let's say I want to make another drum loop out of the same drum loop without getting too crazy. I'll do this for crazy bass sounds. You'll find yourself using this next technique a lot. So I'm going to chop it up a bunch. So I'm just going to, chop it up like so. And then I'm going to scroll through the rest of this file. See, this file still has the rest of it on there. Oh, not when I'm in shift mode though. I'm in stretch mode. So you see the rest of it's still on there. So there is a tool for this. It's called the slider tool. You can hit the S key, as you can see, or slip tool, I guess. Slip. I thought it was called the slider tool. Anyways, you can come down here and hit these little back and forth buttons, and we can then scroll through and select new pieces of the waveform to get a cool new take. This is so useful for a number of things, including finding just cool vocal, anything, drum loops, vocal chops, melodies. You could do this with MIDI too. It's not exclusive to audio, except for I don't believe you can stretch MIDI. but you can stretch audio. Now let's say that, oh, I don't want this one here. I'm going to shift and click. That's one that we didn't talk about. If you shift click, you can drag them around like so. And I haven't covered basic navigation. I suppose I should probably do that in here. I'm going to chop this up a couple more times, maybe get a cool fill here at the end that's a little bit different. So I'll do this, and I'll put another thing there, and let's see here. Why not? I'll put that right there. So this is now this. And there's a little pop at the end. So in order to take care of that without getting too crazy, I'm going to go back to my pencil tool, and I'm going to hold down Alt, and that instantly allows me to snap off the grid so I can do stuff like this. So I'm going to pull that off just so that I do not have that extra little that there. Otherwise I get a pop noise from it trying to read this data. And that's a lot of these basic techniques that I use a lot, just a combination of them. So Shift M, those. Now you have other tools in here. One of them that I find myself using a lot as well is if you select and you hold down Shift and drag, you can, duplicate your sample data. If you hold it down, you hit Control B, it'll duplicate it right next to it. One thing to know about this is that it will duplicate the selected area. So what you could do is you could select an area and then only select a portion of it. And if you hit Control B, it will duplicate that whole area over. So check this out. What if I select this area, but then duplicate this? What will happen? Well, it pops it over in reference to where the selected area started. If we instead had something like this, let's say that we only had this much selected. Well, then check it out. Check out what happens. It will move this over that selected amount. So it'll skip this much and then insert it here. So it should appear right here. And there it is. It appears right there, just as predicted, because it's relative to the selected area. Now, that's something that took me a while to figure out. Another thing, by the way, every now and then I have trouble deselecting something. That's Control D for deselect, which is a super helpful tool. So this way you can select an area and then select all the stuff. Maybe you have some clips here and here and here that you want to duplicate, but you want to leave the rest out of it. You could totally do that. And all you need to do is do that. And then you can either hold Shift and drag over the selected clips, or you can hit Control B and it will duplicate it within the selected area. Another thing that's really helpful about this is oftentimes I want to mute something and keep it there just as a reference, like a vocal take that I considered, or vocal takes that I just have in here, and I don't want to move them because they're in sync, but I've selected it for the most part, and I'm pretty much done digging through vocal takes, so I just want to mute the rest of them, right? So let's say I've got like a bunch of files right here, right? Let's just do this. Okay, so let's say these are all like a whole load of vocal takes or whatever, and I want to mute some of them. Well, if you hit the Alt key on the left side of your keyboard, you're not going to get the mute. It does other things. But if you hold it on the left side, if you hold it on the right side of your keyboard though, check this out. It brings up the mute ability. So you can mute and unmute things. So I'm going to mute these. Now check this out. These, if I mute it, this is muted, but then if I unmute it, it remains muted. Sometimes this can be misleading and you might think what's wrong with FL or whatever. Well, it's simply a case of you have muted these using the actual mute tool. You see I have the mute tool. You can get to it clicking T apparently, but I've always used sort of this method. So you can do that. And that's really cool. That's sort of a handy way of doing this. However, I use this all the time. So I'll mute things so that it's there if I want to turn it on later. But then I could go about soloing and unsoloing stuff and not having to worry about it popping up in my file. So I would I want all these things muted, and I can just do that. Alternatively, you can just select that tool, and it is in your list as well. But I prefer to leave my list as little as possible. For example, I don't even like going into the paintbrush tool. Instead of using the paintbrush tool, let's say I've got this as my selected clip, and you might say, how do you know what the next thing you're going to paint is? Well, you can just click on it. If you click on it, it should select that section of whatever you wanted, but it's also relevant to what's up here. Another thing to note is it will also select the regions that you've chopped. So it's only selecting that as opposed to the entire file. But if you hold down Shift and drag, it will paint like the paint tool. So there's no reason for me to go to the paint tool, not normally. There are occasions where the paint tool will do things and maybe you prefer it as a workflow method. But other than that, I just prefer to use Shift and just do that because the pencil tool is a little more flexible in my humble opinion. The next thing that you should be aware of when you're dealing with these mutes Actually, you know what? That's not really that big of a deal. So that's pretty much my 2 cents on a number of workflow techniques. There are additional techniques, and you can stretch silence files. So if we hit Shift M and stretch these, you notice that it does stretch everything. So you want to be careful about stuff like that. Let me just make sure. Oh, let's talk about this. This is kind of a cool deal. If you hold down Alt and okay. Let me say that again. If you hold down Alt and then you right click, it will preview whatever you have clicked over it. So isn't that kind of handy? Another thing to know about that is if you go into your, let's say, into your piano roll. So let's add like an FL keys or something. And really quick, just lay down, whoops, and just lay down something. All right, let's say, oh, I want to know what that sounds like. Well, if you Alt and then right click here, oh, I'm hitting the space bar. See, this line pops up and you can do that. And of course, we've written a masterpiece. Okay, now let's really quick talk about zooming. Zooming is a really useful feature. I normally scroll around like this. I'll hold down Control and I use my mouse wheel and I can scroll in and out wherever my mouse is. Very, very handy dandy. And if I hold down Control and middle mouse click, I can go like this. And then this is another one. If I click my middle mouse wheel and move around, this is called panning. This is so useful if your project file is huge and you don't want to accidentally scroll farther than you want. Panning will allow you to get really small, easily predictable motions. So it's a very handy way. You'll see me use combinations of this all the time. There's another way though. Oh, and if you hold down Alt, middle mouse click in and out, you'll get this sort of zoom function. There's a whole bunch of them, but those are the big ones that I use is the Alt with the middle mouse button click up and down. And then the, not Alt, the Control. Control with middle mouse click up and down will do this zooming. Now, it should be noted that if these things are grouped, you cannot, if they are zoomed down, they do not scroll with the rest of your file. But if they are grouped like this, you can hold down Alt and click, and it will automatically scroll them out to where they do zoom, which is a really handy deal. And by the way, if you click this menu, you see that G is grouped with track above, which is what I use to do that so quickly. Now, there's a couple other ways. Let's say you have a huge project file, and I'll occasionally use this. If you use Alt and then right click, or is it left click? There's an option here. Oh, there we go. It's not Alt, it's Control. My bad. I often don't look down at my hands when I'm doing these sorts of things, so it's sort of a little unusual to say it out loud. But if you hold down Control and left click and drag, it will zoom in on the thing you've selected. And then once you're done working here, you can simply hold Control and zoom back out, and it will automatically zoom out to show you everything, sort of the optimized to see the whole big picture thing. I do not like always doing this because sometimes it'll zoom me out in weird ways, and then I have to end up doing stuff like this and zooming in, and it could just be annoying. But if I need to get somewhere really quickly, it's a very handy dandy way. Like, oh, edit, and then bang, I'm out, and then I can zoom out even further. Actually, it doesn't want to zoom out. Last time it zoomed me out even further. And I believe your selection also can play a role in this. But basically, if you zoom in with the Control, what is this? Right mouse click, and then you just use it again, you'll zoom me back out. So that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Support me on Patreon, subscribe, and have a blessed day.